Now, I was thinking about all the conversation that is around Dak Prescott, the quarterback of your Dallas Cowboys, right? And I know maybe more than ever, there are people that are ready to get him off of this team, right? Fire him into the sun, as I like to say.
Yeah, they've actually changed his last name. It is not Dak Prescott anymore.
It is what?
Dak Prescott for now.
Okay, very good.
For now, it's his quarterback for now.
That's right. There's been a lot of conversations that
think we just let the contract expire.
Yeah, how could you possibly if you did? And one of the things I was thinking about is even if you just take it from a kind of a neutral perspective, I was like, Dak Prescott, and I guess Dak Prescott is above a certain line that I felt like, you had him in the NFL. And in baseball, you would call it like the Mendoza line, and not exactly the same concept, but like the general idea.
Talent of quarterback.
Right, for a talent of quarterback. Yeah. For the Mendoza line, again, not exactly, but for the football for a while, I viewed it as like Andy Dalton at one point, right? When he was with the Bengals, and I was like, I don't even know who that is now. But it's like you get a guy of that caliber or better, and you just that is the quarterback that you probably need to stay with.
A lot of people were talking about the Andy Dalton thing. It's like, okay, if Andy Dalton was the worst you could possibly be.
That you should probably stay with. Yeah. And if you have someone who's less than that, you probably need to make that move.
That's right, serviceable.
Right.
And that's no disrespect to Andy. He had a nice career.
Absolutely. I have a lot of credit and defense for Andy Dalton in the ways that sometimes some people will try and discredit him or, criticize him. But that's neither here nor there. Ultimately, the thought that I came to then was, wait, do we still have that perspective on quarterbacks that there is a line that you need to be better than? Does that still hold? Because that felt like a football truism for a while, where it's like, hey man, if your quarterback is not this good, whatever this is or whoever this represented the line to be, and does that still hold in this modern NFL?
In a way, it's kind of blurred though. The line is kind of blurred. They used to say, okay, top 10 quarterback. Then it's maybe top 12 quarterback. It was always more than 15 because it's 32 teams in the league. It's top 15. That's not good enough. Got to be top 10. And then they started putting them in groups. Well, tiers. You follow what I'm saying? They do the tiers. Mm-hmm. He's this tier. He may not be that tier, but he's this tier. And out of these 3 tiers, you better be one of them 3 tiers.
Right.
That's the way you would do tiers.
And so maybe it is a tier, but at some point, there's got to be a last guy in, right? And I do wonder,
you're trying to name a name.
Well, I don't even need to name a name. I just wonder, are we still holding it in that? Is that still the perspective that we're utilizing to do a very rough analysis of quarterbacks? Because I don't know that. I still think that whatever name you come up with, if you did put a name on it, I think Dak Prescott's probably above that.
I agree.
Now, of course, you can look at this maybe where this gets a little, jagged and a little bit tougher to, agree on the idea that there is a definitive line as you look at the Detroit Lions, who are going to an NFC Championship game. Their quarterback is Jared Goff, who you look over at the Los Angeles Rams, and the Rams actively made the decision to no longer have Jared Goff as a quarterback, with seemingly pushing him below whatever that line is and saying, hey, we need to go get another quarterback who we believe is more capable for what we're trying to do. And that leads them to go get Matt Stafford. They ultimately win a championship, a Super Bowl with Matt Stafford. But, then you see Jared Goff in a different circumstance with the Detroit Lions. He looks more than serviceable for them, and they are going to an NFC Championship game. I don't think that people view them as not deserving to be there or as a severe underdog to the San Francisco 49ers coming up this Sunday. And so, again, that makes me wonder, does that idea still hold, that you have to have the certain quality quarterback to keep going with them, or, if the quarterback does not reach a certain level, do you move somewhere else?
It's a great conversation. I'm going to say in that particular discourse between Jared Goff and Matthew Stafford, the way I would explain it, I explained it over the weekend because it actually came up. Mm-hmm. Not in this particular conversation, but those 2 quarterbacks in particular. Jared Goff just wasn't ready yet. Even though they had gone to the Super Bowl, they weren't riding his arm. He wasn't like, the arm talent, Patrick Mahomes guy. He just wasn't ready yet. What people kind of forget is he came out of the same draft as Dak Prescott right now. You follow what I'm saying? He's 29 years old. He was the number 1 pick in 2016. Dak was a 4th round pick in 2016. They made the move to get Matthew Stafford because he was more seasoned. They said, we are built to win the Super Bowl now. Damn it. Goff ain't ready yet. It's kind of like the arm talent in San Diego. The arm talent with the Chargers quarterback,
with Justin Herbert.
I love Justin Herbert, but there'll be those who will say, well, you know what? He's just not quite there yet because he's got the talent. He's just not quite there yet. Goff didn't have that insane arm talent, but he just wasn't there yet. So they made that move. And then there were people, when they got Matthew Stafford, they said, well, he's too old and he really wasn't that good with it. He couldn't get the Lions anywhere, so he wasn't that good. And then all of a sudden, last year he was hurt, but this year's like, you know what? He might be on the verge of a Hall of Fame career if you think about it. So it kind of moves. It's almost like the goalposts kind of move, because the people who are doubting Dak Prescott right now, saying he's quote unquote in a tier below the Andy Dalton line, they're dissatisfied with his playoff performances. So just like during this regular season, they would say, well, he can't win on the road. Now they're going to say, well, he's only good in the regular season. Yeah, he had 38 touchdown passes and led the league. He had a great year in the regular season, but playoffs, he sucks. So therefore, he's below that Dalton line. So the goalposts will move to make the argument sustain itself.
And that's the thing I'm trying to get to is like, do we even have that solid idea? And some people have thrown out some ideas for who the, I guess, modern Dalton line would be. As some people would say it's Ryan Tannehill, who, I mean, very evidently the Titans moved on from. Right? They went, and I guess
even though he didn't leave the building,
the prospect of quarterbacks coming in,
benched his ass.
Right? The prospect of young quarterbacks coming in has affected this, right? And so maybe that is, and I know that that's definitely a part that Dak Prescott detractors look at, as the idea, well, go get someone else and like see if maybe you hit a lottery, hit on a lottery ticket, as opposed to sticking with what you know in a way. And that I think that's one of the things that kind of makes this a little bit tougher on that conversation, even though some people are like, maybe it's Derek Carr or maybe it's Jimmy Garoppolo. And I think Derek Carr might be closer to the answer than, I think that might be a pretty good submission, 214.
Garoppolo's always just hurt. But back to that line or how, it's easy to move on now, because look at the success Green Bay's had with Jordan Love, and look at the success that Houston's had with C.J. Stroud. I would just make it very specific just this last year to show you how hard it is to make the right choice at quarterback. Just last year alone, Bryce Young or C.J. Stroud, if you were making the conversation right now, you would have no idea. I mean, last year at this point, you would have no idea, because Bryce Young went a pick earlier than C.J. Stroud. And C.J. Stroud is obvious the best answer right now, but you can't tell half the room that a year ago. Yeah, and it just shows you how hard it is to make the right choice.
Sure. And I think
you can always say, Jordan Love, C.J. Stroud, it's easy to move on. But what if you get Bryce Young? What if you get Sam Darnold? What if you get, I'll even throw in Baker Mayfield, because he wasn't right at the time for the Cleveland Browns. Even though, guess what? He took them to further playoff success than even Deshaun Watson right now.
Yeah. I think that it's interesting. You could even look at like the 2020 draft class, right? The ways in which those quarterbacks were drafted, or maybe it isn't 2020. It was you have the ways that these things stack up in different ways, right? And ultimately, one of the things when it comes to drafting a quarterback is I think that sometimes we put a lot on the individual when circumstances matter. Like football in general, I kind of hate how individual the analysis gets, especially when we talk about quarterbacks, because it ends up being we talk about them and all of this stuff is like there's so much context that it's hard to unravel what parts are what. But I found that to be intriguing within the larger conversation about Dak Prescott, which again I think gets made a little bit, I don't know if it's tougher or easier depending on how you view it, because of the contractual circumstances and the salary cap ramifications and all of those other portions of it. But just the basic idea of that, do we even still agree to the idea of if you are below this line or if you are above this, or if you're above this line, it's better to stay with what you know? And I don't know. It seems like a lot of people, at the very least in this fan base, don't subscribe to that theory, that idea. Or if they do, they seem to have Dak Prescott below what that ultimate line would be. And that was something that I was thinking about.
And that's the passion right now, because they can't seem to get to the NFC Championship game. It's got to be all his fault. When if you look at what happened in that one particular game, how about it's the entire franchise's fault? Offense, defense, special teams, coaches, front office. That game right there sucked, and everybody's fingerprints is all over it. If you want to stick to just the quarterbacks alone, we can go back to, okay, you could even, if you want to even say argument, you say, well, wait a minute, if you can't win the big games in the playoffs, or you can't win the big games on the road, when he was a rookie, how come he beat Pittsburgh in Pittsburgh? How come he beat Green Bay in Green Bay? He won these games where Tony Romo was supposed to come back. But guess what? Damn it, they won 11 straight when he won games they wasn't supposed to win. You can say, well, that was Zeke. Well, guess what? Zeke ain't here. And shout out to Zeke. He was at the Mavs game last night. And by the way, that particular year when Dak was a rookie, he was the offensive rookie of the year. So again, it's so subjective, and it's so hard to say, okay, it's easy to move on. Not if you look at the language of contracts, because you don't know how complicated it may be to move on from his contract. You don't know. You just say, wait a minute, you got to eat the contract 1 year and move on. Might be he has a no trade clause. It might be that, guess what? He not only has a no trade clause, he has a no franchise tag clause in there. There's language that you only heard about and don't really know about. So again, it might be in the Cowboys' best interest to add more pieces around him, maybe trade him a year or two later, but you better extend the contract, because guess what? The salary cap goes from $228, I believe, to over $240 million a year, which means, guess what? You've got 13 free agents that you're going to move around. You may be able to build better around him where you don't have to count on only him. He can be the manager of the game, the way Cam Newton put it, not bus driver. Manager of the game that's more comfortable to him. In other words, if Brock Purdy were, quote unquote, the quarterback for the Cowboys, would he have had the same success as Dak Prescott had? I would probably say yeah. That he would need the same kind of help. He would need the same kind of better team around him to go further.
I don't even want to get into that Brock Purdy thing, because that's a whole different area.
Like I said,
we're long
Cam
on time
Newton
at
called
this
him
point.
a game manager, and he wasn't trying to diss him. He says there's insane arm talent, which he calls game changers. Remember Cam? They just lit Cam up.
And I mean, I think a lot of people that would like to see a different quarterback
would probably being a game manager.
A lot of them would probably look at the idea of, you got to go try and find a game changer. Regardless,
you do, but you don't know it in the draft.
Regardless, that just wanted to get into that idea.
If I were to trade Dak, I would trade him for a proven veteran that I know can play.
Well, you're not really in that vein unless he agrees.
That's
to
why
a
I would
trade.
say that when they were doing the hypotheticals about Micah Parsons, that's what I said I would trade Micah Parsons for. Not draft picks, but a brand name quarterback that's awesome, that you know what you're going to get. Not a theoretical that maybe turn out to be Bryce Young.